So, welcome, Stephen. Lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you,
Can you
Wendy.
tell us a little bit about your life before this film? What were your thoughts, particularly on the afterlife, on grief, um, before you had your own experiences with this?
Thank you, Wendy. The extent of my experience with the afterlife was a cartoon called Casper the Friendly Ghost. It was my favorite cartoon when I was a kid, but that's as much as I knew about the afterlife up until the time I started making this film. Do you want to hear the story, the whole story?
Yeah,
Is that what you
tell
want
us
to
the
hear?
whole story.
My father died. As most people, I think, in this space, usually a death is what ushers us in. And in my case, it was my father. But it was my mother's reaction to my father's death, which really became something that my siblings and I had to address. My mother pretty much fell apart. And in a way that made us feel like she needed intervention. It wasn't the kind of grief that was just going to get better over time. This was something that really needed to be addressed. My siblings and I all flew down to Florida, and we did everything you're supposed to do for the bereaved when someone dies. We got her into a support group. We got her into grief counseling. Urged her to attend religious services. Nothing had any impact at all. And we were getting a little bit nervous because we all had to get back to our own families out of state. So luckily, my mother had a sweet, kind little old lady neighbor named Ethel who came over to our house and said, Irene, we don't talk about this a whole lot. And please don't tell anybody this. But I do something that really helps me with my loss. And I'm going to suggest you do the same. I write to my late husband. I write to him every night. It makes me feel closer to him. And then she leaned in real close to my mother and she whispered, and he writes back. So I didn't know what to make of this. This was not my world. My siblings and I were all a little bit like just confused. Like, who's this kooky woman that's come over to our house accosting our mother with this offer? My siblings were actually pretty upset because my mother didn't need any extra complications at this moment. My mother was very upset. She ended up virtually throwing Ethel out of the house. I was really interested in Ethel because I'm a little bit more open-minded, I guess, than my brothers and my sisters. So I followed Ethel over to her house, where Ethel proceeded to show me a stack of yellow legal pads. And she said, you see those yellow legal pads over there? Those contain my conversations with my husband, my late husband, over a 12-year period. That's my post-mortem marriage. So I was thinking to myself, wow, Ethel has schizophrenia. That was my reaction to her. That's what I thought. But I was very curious. How crazy is this lady? I really wanted to ask her some questions. I really wanted to understand. But in my conversation with her, she just didn't seem crazy. And the more I got to know her, the more I got to like her. And I realized that she may have been one of the brightest, coolest ladies I've ever known. And I was thinking, whatever she's doing, she's got the opposite philosophy that my mother has about grief, apparently. And I wanted my mother to get in on this. Whatever Ethel was doing, it was working for her because Ethel was a very happy person. So I ended up inviting a camera crew down to Florida. And I said, okay, let's follow Ethel around and let's follow my mother around. And let's compare these two ladies. By the way, the Irene character in the film is my mother. So by following them around, I figure at some point, maybe I would have something interesting to show an audience. I didn't know what I was going to get, but I knew that it was going to be interesting. I could just take a break there.
And it is more than interesting. It is absolutely fascinating. The dynamic between your mother, Irene, and Ethel, it is fabulous. How on earth did you get them to agree to be filmed? I think this is the magic of this film. All the people in there are real. And the film, by the way, if you haven't seen it, you will be seeing it, I'm sure, in our special screening at the end of the week. But the production is beautiful, and they look so fat. Every one of them looks like a film star. They couldn't have looked better, if you'd had paid actors who'd had years and years of experience.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. That's actually, and I really appreciate that because I wanted the film to look pretty because, like you said earlier, it's my first fully independent production. But in a way, it was problematic because the more slick a film looks, the less real it seems to the documentary audience. So a lot of people were assuming that a lot of things in the film were recreations. And I had to kind of make that extra step and make a very firm statement. No, these are not recreations. Everything is real. There's nothing scripted. It's all the real thing. But if I had to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't have made it quite so pretty. I probably would have made it a little bit more raw looking.
No, it's fabulous. Honestly, the visual quality of the film is absolutely amazing. And a lot of the camera angles are really interesting as well. There's a huge amount of work in producing this film. It's filmed over 4 locations.
Yes, I was the director, but my co-producer, his name is Christopher Seward. He also helped me edit the film. And it's important that I drop his name because I'm not a veteran filmmaker. I needed somebody like this guy, Christopher, to really make this sing. Christopher is the same editor and writer for Fahrenheit 9/11 and Sicko. So he's on Michael Moore's team. So I needed that kind of talent to put this together. So I'm not the award-winning filmmaker. He really is. I guess I could say I'm the award-winning filmmaker now because this film won awards. But before now, I was really nothing. I was really a nobody.
So tell us about the awards the film has won.
I'm happy to boast about that. It's won 11 awards in the film festival circuit, including Best Documentary and Best Feature Film at a few different festivals.
That's really, really, really wonderful. So who do you think is the intended audience for the film? What was the aim of making this film?
I like that you asked me that because it changed over time. At first, I was just tickled with Ethel, and I thought, let me just make a profile of Ethel because she's so interesting. She's doing this automatic writing thing. I had not heard of it before. And whether she was crazy or not, it just seemed so romantic. So I just really liked Ethel. And then I told my wife what I was planning on doing, and my wife said, my wife is the smarter one in the couple, as you might think, but I think usually the wife is usually smarter. I think most of the people here will agree with that. She said, if you make it about Ethel, then this could get lost on the Sci-Fi Network. Why don't you instead make it about grief and something everybody could, relate to in some way? So once she convinced me that was probably the smarter way to go, I thought it would be like more inclusive if I showed all the different perspectives on afterlife, something from the clergyman, something from the scientist, something from the forensic psychiatrist. So whether people were believers or not believers, I thought everybody deserved a voice and have their own process recognized. And the clinicians that were helping the others get through grief, they should also have their vocation acknowledged and recognized and let them have a voice as well.
I think that's one of the strengths of the film, that it's not it comes across as being neutral. It's not pushing the afterlife line. I must admit, for me, one of the strengths of the films is some of the quotes. I feel myself cheering with some of the lines that come up. Some of the quotes I like. We can't wait for science to give us permission to do this. Don't you love that?
I do. I do love that. Yes.
Many of the classical paradigms are beginning to break apart. Love that one. And of course, William Buhlman's line, our capacities have been limited by our belief systems. Really, really great. And most grief practitioners are misaligned from the latest research. I'd say they would be all some of your favorite lines as well. Do you have any others in there?
You mentioned some of my favorites as well. I mean, every line in the film is I could say is a favorite because I had hundreds of hours of footage to choose from, and I chose my favorites. So you picked out my favorites of my favorites just now. But one of my favorites, I would say, is something that Graham Maxey said because it touched me so much. Graham Maxey is the lead therapist in the film, and he's talking to Karen, who's the protagonist, and she's talking about how she's really kind of stuck with this, just suffering and thinking about her husband. And it's all a very unhappy process, but she does it quite often. And I think Graham said something along the lines of, well, that pain that you choose to kind of hold on to, that makes sense that you do that. That's where you last saw him. And even now, when I'm just saying that quote, it gives me the chills. That's right. People do tend to hold on to very often the last place or even if it's in the casket, they'll hold on to that image, and it's usually an unhappy image. It's them in the casket. It's them in a hospital bed. If it was a terrible accident, it's even worse. It's them, with blood. So, I think that quote gets to me.
Well, of course, that's the beauty of the work of Alan Botkin, that it is focused on reducing that trauma of that last image.
Yeah. You mean Dr. Botkin and Dr. Hogan, right?
Sorry. Yeah, Dr. Botkin and Dr. Hogan.
You don't mind if I give Dr. Hogan a plug here?
Of course. He's our publisher extraordinaire. Stephen, how did you find your star family, the Beersworth family, and how on earth did you get them to cooperate with such they are really the essence of the film, and that they're on screen maybe 80% of the time. So
they're definitely the protagonists, I would say. I don't know if you remember this, but in the film, we find out that Karen, the protagonist, who's been in grief for many years, her estranged mother-in-law is Ethel.
And she was really her mother-in-law.
Yes.
My gosh, how on earth did the fates align to bring you the mother-in-law, who is an expert in automatic writing, and the daughter-in-law with such photogenic children,
right,
who is your grief subject?
What happened was I was interviewing all the women all the widows, I should say. There was only one widower. I didn't end up using him because he was too far gone in terms of his grief, unfortunately. But all the widows in my mother's circle, and she had kind of a de facto support group of these widows in her community. I interviewed all of them. And I also asked if they had family members who were widowed, and I would talk to them as well. So Ethel, of course, I just asked her, if I could talk to her daughter-in-law, and she got Karen's permission. And then I found out that Karen and her family actually lived near me in Connecticut. So it was very convenient for me to film them more than just both their interview. I could actually follow them around for years.
They come across like very, very professional actors.
But when you're with a family for 7 years, you kind of start to blend into the wallpaper. So it's not like they were natural actors. It's almost like they just forgot I was there.
I'm just overawed by the amount of work that's gone into this film. It truly is a labor of love.
I really appreciate that, Wendy, and I think I'm going to want you to interview me again and say that to other people as well.
Well, I mean, there's if we're going to get on to the things I like about the film, first of all, I mean, the heroes of the irrational afterlife thought that you have got on there, they're all my heroes. They're all people, and I find myself cheering. You've got Janice Holden, Dr. Janice Holden at Texas, and it's lovely to see her in her own grounds on the North Texas University, and to actually see the department which is doing the work with the grief study. Now, that was the thing. You did say this was the first film that had looked at a publicly funded study. Does that mean that all the people who went in for grief counselling didn't have to pay?
That's right. This was a volunteer study. And what I meant by publicly funded, I just meant that the university was funding, or it was one of the organizations that's connected to the university was funding the study using public funds.
So people could go and have the there are 2 sessions of grief counseling. I notice that that's a standard thing to have 2 sessions, isn't it?
Right. And all the researchers and all the data, the analysts were all, yes, they were all paid with the public funding.
Well, that's fantastic. I didn't know that North Texas University was doing something like that. I don't think any of us knew that.
It's one of the largest research universities. You're one of the largest research universities in the U.S.
And I'd say that's because Janice Holden has been there, and she's been the mover and shaker behind it, which is just incredible. And I found myself cheering Janice Holden so much. And of course, Alan Botkin was there. Joe Dispenza is absolutely gorgeous, and they're looking so good. And I love Amit Goswami. He's one of my heroes, and they made him look 20 years younger. He looked fabulous, And there he is, and Paul Selig and William Bullman and David Hufford. They are just so great. And of course, then you got the forensic psychologist. How on earth did you get, with his, this poor lady, they're all suffering from grief and schizophrenia, and if they continue to be communicating with their loved one for 20 years, there's something really wrong here. I don't know how he agreed to be filmed.
He actually was excited to be filmed. He was so excited when he found out that we wanted to film his interview as well as film his session with Ethel, and it was going to be on the same day. So we asked him to have a change of wardrobe, so it would look on camera like 2 different days. And he was so thrilled to have a wardrobe change.
I mean, this is incredible. Here you've got this wonderful woman who's obviously developed her mediumistic abilities and who's been communicating with her husband happily for 20 years. And he's virtually accusing her of being very, very ill.
Yes. Now, in every Q&A that I've had, people have asked me, well, what does the forensic psychiatrist think of this film? He must be livid because we make him look a little bit like the villain of the story. And I have to admit that's a little bit purposeful, but I did speak to him after he saw the film, and I told him that people are asking, what do you think? I mean, did it move you at all in any direction, or did it just make you unhappy? And he said he really enjoyed the film, but all the study really proves is that people who perceive that their loved one is nearby, those people get better. It doesn't really prove that their loved one is actually in the room. So I told him, I said, that's absolutely true. All we can really know at this time is that this helps. And that's pretty much the whole driving force of the movie. The movie's, I guess, it's gestalt, if you will, is this heals, whether you're a skeptic or a believer. And that's one of the things that surprised me, is that people who actually don't really believe in an afterlife end up having a more profound experience in the IADC therapy. But now, Wendy, you have to ask me why that is.
Tell me why.
Well, from what the researchers explained, I don't want to sound like I'm a researcher. I'm not one of the researchers. I'm not Dr. Botkin or Dr. Hogan. But what they'll tell me is something along these lines. Expectations can block results. So a lot of people who find out about the therapy are so excited to have this reunion that they're rehearsing it ahead of time, and they're excited when they're in the room, and they're just chomping at the bit to get that reunion. And unfortunately, that's the worst state of mind to be in for something like this to happen. What you want to be in is more of a meditative, relaxed state. So when the therapist does his bilateral stimulation, that induced after-death communication therapy, then the sitter kind of has the reaction that's just most auspicious to getting this kind of result. The skeptics don't have any expectations that this will work. So they are actually paradoxically, they call it a paradoxical response. Paradoxically, the skeptics are actually coming out of this therapy with their minds blown and like, wow, I guess I had this all wrong.
Fantastic. Look, I think on that note, we're halfway through our session, so I think we can hand over to questions. I think we might start off with Craig.
Yeah, it's a wonderful experience. And what's wonderful about it is that we are now in a dream. And what we do when we go into the IADC experience is we wake up. And then we can have that kind of a beautiful, gratifying relationship with the person living on the other side. And you talked about the fact that people who have expectations are more often blocking the communications. And we found that with people who have successful first communications. And then the second and the third, they can't figure out why they didn't have such a successful communication. And it's because then they've got the expectations. They want to do the same thing they did before. And so we see a lot of that, but it's wonderful. And I'm so glad to see that you're publicizing this and getting the word out. And we have others who are doing it. Jane is doing a marvelous job with her method using bilateral stimulation over Zoom. And I think it's a wonderful ability that she's used to help people to get into that state of mind.
Thanks, Craig. Stephen, are the IADC people using Zoom for consultations now? Are they doing it on Zoom as well?
Yes, they are.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I didn't understand how they were able to do it. And what they do is just ask the client to do this. That's the bilateral stimulation.
So they're not using eye movements anymore? That's something I saw in the film, though. They were using the tapping.
They are. They are. It's just some therapists prefer, and I think Graham Maxey started a big movement towards the tapping because he met with a large group of blind people, and he needed to do something besides having them following a pencil back and forth with their eyes. So, but he liked the way it felt. It felt more intimate to him to do the tapping, and so he kept it. And he trained all the therapists that in his corral with that same method.
Fantastic. I'd like to invite Dan Drayson, who's here, to come in and say hello. Have you two met each other before?
No,
Stephen, you haven't.
I've seen Dan's video and an interview with you.
Yeah.
And it's
Dan, have you seen Stephen's film?
No, I haven't. Excuse me, I haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Well, this weekend, hopefully on our screening, you'll be able to come in and have a look at it. It's fantastic.
Wonderful.
Are you aware of this, the work of Alan Botkin, Dan? Is it something that you've been interested in?
I'm somewhat aware of it, yes. And I'm looking forward to seeing Stephen's film. I've been just coming off a very intense work period and just trying to catch up with everyone and everything right now, and apologize for being late today. But anyway, Stephen, it's good to meet you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your film.
good to meet you, Dan. And I want your opinion as both an audience member and as a fellow filmmaker.
Sure.
Okay.
Glad to. Yeah. Well, let's connect directly.
That'd be great.
Well, first, thank you for the presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the film. I will follow that link as soon as it's available. I'm curious, with the production of this film and all of your experience talking to all of these people, have you pursued any of your own experiences, and do you mind sharing, what that impact was on you?
Sure. During the making of this film, I interviewed a lot of mediums, and it's only because I thought I thought the film was going to consist of a lot of mediums. I didn't know. I ended up just using one medium that's more of a professor than a medium. It's just the mediumship is more of a sideline for him. I'm talking about Paul Selig. But what I found out was that, yes, there are people that are interested in talking to me, and I've had several sessions because I was, to vet these different mediums, I would actually have readings. So I probably had maybe 30 or so readings in the making of the film. And it seemed like I was getting a lot of consistent messages, which just added to the veracity of the whole process. So I found it really exciting. I loved reconnecting to parents, to really close friends that I've lost, So that was pretty great. And in terms of me pursuing, yes, I guess what I do now to keep in touch is I'll just talk out loud to my deceased. That's a change for me, and that probably only came with the making of this film. I was probably on the fence about afterlife issues, and then I had to make the film to cross the bridge, and now I'm fully there.
Really quick second question. Do you
Sure.
feel like they respond?
Sometimes I feel like I'm getting certain signs. I don't want to profess to be like psychic or that I have like experimented with automatic writing. And when I've done that, I felt like I was getting responses that seemed like veridical evidence, as they say, that seemed like they were real, like what they were writing. Like sometimes I would do these things. Like I found out, I have to go back and tell you a little story. Okay. My very first moment with the camera, I wanted to interview Ethel, who ended up being the automatic writer in the story. And I wanted to see how real Harold was. So I bought a deck of cards with me. I brought a deck of cards and I looked at the bottom deck of card myself, looking at the deck. And I said, okay, Ethel, could you ask your late husband what card I'm looking at? And she said, oh, Harold doesn't like this. And I didn't know what was happening, but she kind of explained to me that my doubt that Harold was real was emitting some kind of a negative charge. And that was not good for Harold. Now, according to her, they share one mind. He speaks to her all the time, and they're telepathically. So she said, Harold won't answer the question. I see in my head that the two of spades, but Harold's not going to answer the question. It turns out it was the two of spades. So I felt like, okay, this is real. And I feel comfortable making Ethel like the center of this to some degree. And everybody in the story is connected to Ethel in some way. It's either a friend, it's her daughter-in-law, it's her granddaughters. Everybody in the film is connected to Ethel.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Why are you fundraising for it? What would you like to see happen to the film?
The film has been selected by PBS. That was very exciting for me because I didn't think they would be interested. I thought PBS was going to be too conservative to select it, so I was very excited to get their imprimatur. So they did ask me, though, to make it 56 minutes. And I have to do other things and have to have an edit so it's PBS friendly. So some of the language has to get cleaned up. Some of the credits have to be changed, and I have to make it a half hour shorter, which has turned out to be a bigger deal than I thought because I have to get my editor back to sit next to me, who's very expensive. And so we're going to have to come up with a new cut for PBS. So that's what the fundraising efforts are for.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, for Stephen, what an absolutely fantastic, wonderful story. I mean, I wonder, how did that affect your mother and your siblings?
How did what affect my mother and my siblings?
Your movie, this whole story that unfolded.
Thank you for the question. My mother never got to see the film. My mother died very close to the end of principal photography. As a matter of fact, both Ethel and my mother passed within days of the end of the film, which I thought was kind of cute in its own way.
Yeah.
So they never. My mother and Ethel both got to see the trailer, and they were both pretty excited about that. And I would say that through mediumship, my mother is very proud of me.
Yes,
I found that out.
I think so too. And your siblings?
My siblings think it's pretty cool that I made a movie like this. I don't think either of them are big believers. So it's like I get a mixed response from them. It's more like, it's cool that you did this. It's great seeing mom on the screen again. You know, it's great to see her on the big screen. She always wanted to be an actress. But you know, it's not that they could tell me, wow, you're really trying to move the needle forward, and that's great for you to be doing. Right. That's what feels really good to me, when I feel like people are actually changing the way that they might think about this. It doesn't happen often, but there are some materialists that have come back to me after seeing the film and saying, this actually is changing my mind a little bit. They won't give me a lot, but they'll give me that much, which is really all I need.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing it. Thank you.
Sure.
One of the things I like in the film that you address is the different reactions of different religions to the film.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little bit about your exploration with different practitioners of religion, and particularly the ones that didn't make it to the film?
I only met with two clergymen, and those are the two clergymen that are in the film. There's my mother's rabbi, and there's a professor, a theologian at the Sacred Heart University, where I guess that was Stephanie was applying to go to school. So they were just happened to be there. I didn't have to search to see who would be a good interview. I just used the people who are already in their lives.
Fantastic, because it's still a big problem for a lot of grieving people, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I like the way somebody in the film says that these people that a lot of people have experiences and then they're talked out of them, and I love the way that you did include that.
Thank you.
Is that something you've come across with people?
Yes, I have, and what I loved about David Hufford being in the film, even though I didn't, unfortunately, this line he had didn't make it to the final cut, but he said that suppression of these kinds of experiences is a necessary step towards marginalizing them. And that was a favorite quote that just did not get into the film. But when I realized when my mother's grief counselor started telling her that Ethel is experiencing denial by talking to her late husband, and if she tries the same thing, she will be in denial. When I found that out, that kind of put a fire under me a little bit, because it didn't take me much research at all. I probably had to only look at the afterlife report, but it didn't take me much research at all to find out that there were studies. There was a study by, you probably know Dewey Reese's name, Wendy. Dewey Reese was a physician. I'm sure if anybody does not know already, he was a physician in the 1970s who went into Wales and did a poll. He surveyed nearly 300 widows and widowers and asked one simple question: what is helping you get through grief the most? And he was very surprised to find out that about half the people who said they were having a good experience, they were having a good experience because they had a visit from their deceased loved one. That's what's getting them through grief the most. So that was pretty shocking. And that should have been front page news in 1971, I would have thought. But it wasn't, because they had to call it hallucinations. That was a term of art they were using. So, and then eventually, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, they had to put in something about how these experiences were happening, and it's a normal part of grief. I think they were called the normal hallucinations of bereavement. But they continued to use the word hallucinations for many, many, many years. I think maybe just recently, they removed the word hallucination and they put something else in instead, because the word hallucination is kind of disparaging to what these things are. You can't have a normal hallucination. That's an oxymoron. So, but I was thinking, but intuitively, I thought something was wrong. And then when I did this research, I found that, well, if this is right in the DSM, and the DSM is something that sits on psychiatrists, it's their desk reference, right? It's right on their desk. So this grief counselor was saying, my mother and Ethel were in denial for even venturing down this road. Why would that be? Why weren't they looking at the manual? It was really shocking to me that this is their career, and they're guiding people, and they're helping people make decisions that impact the rest of their lives, and they're giving them misinformation.
All of a sudden, when you were talking, I thought that the process is not just healing for the person that lost the person, but all of a sudden it came to me, could it possibly be healing for the departed? And that's really because I think, the relationship can change through the communication. So I'd love your opinion on that.
Thank you. I mean, I've heard, first of all, what I've just learned this relatively recently, and I'm kind of glad it's almost synchronistic that you brought that up. I didn't realize that that was happening, but at least according to the people who are in this field who believe there's something really happening, I don't want to speak for anybody, but it is a two-way street. The healing does go on both ends, because a lot of the reasons, apparently, again, I don't want to sound like an expert, but apparently the primary reason why our loved ones are coming through in these mediumship sittings or through automatic writing or through IADC, they're coming through because they need that help on their own journey. They need to mend fences with their loved ones, or they need to guide their loved ones because that's their job on the other side. They need to help. They need to be of service to us. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me to think of it that way. So I'm glad you kind of came to that conclusion yourself.
Thank you.
Sure.
Another question I want to add, that I really do believe that it helps those in spirit. In my work, and I've done a few hundred readings using EVP, many for parents who've lost children, but a lot of spouses in there too. And it is so clear to me that those in spirit want this very badly, and that they get enormous relief if they can see their loved one, realizing that they've gone on, that they're okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's no question in my mind that we're helping both sides when we allow, people.
I mean, there's some people who will say that if you're stuck on this side, they're stuck on that side. They can't proceed where they have to go. By the way, Graham Maxey, the lead therapist in the film, his spouse happens to be a medium. And she told Graham, and Graham told me, that when Karen had her epiphany, there was a big celebration on the other side. They were waiting for that because Karen had been grieving for 17 years.
Yes. Speaking of this, the team of mediums that I work with often say that so many folks on the other side are dying to get through to us, pardon the expression, and that there are so few opportunities that they're kind of having to give out numbered tickets on the other side. And I don't know whether that's literally the case, but that's the general idea, that the desire to communicate it comes from both ends. And when we can meet in the middle, it's really wonderful. That's been my experience.
Can I ask a question that nobody here has asked yet? My favorite question is, why use the word ghosts? I mean, that's kind of pejorative, right? Why ghosts? I mean, a lot of people get a little bit turned off by the word ghost. It's either because it's frightening or because they don't want to think about their deceased in the form of a ghost. It just rubs them up the wrong way. Now, Daniel, you have a question about that. You have the answer for me?
Well, I don't have a specific answer about ghosts, but I just want to mention that my own first book, which just came out last week, called A New Science of the Afterlife, the longest chapter in the book is about semantics.
Oh, really?
And how we create our presumed reality with language. And I don't think I used the word ghost in the book once.
And that was purposeful.
We are so spooked by the tools that our culture uses to suppress and deny and frighten us from connecting with the greater reality. And so and there's things like in that chapter, there's a little section called "Where the Bodies Are Buried." And the answer is, where are the bodies? Some of the bodies are buried right here in the English language. When we say somebody, nobody, everybody, don't these loaded words subtly reinforce the idea that we're nothing but our bodies? Mm-hmm. That sort of thing. So I hope that people can start thinking about language and how it's used and how it tends to reinforce the social norms for the most part. Anyway, that's all I wanted to mention.
I like that explanation. I'm going to tell you actually why I chose the word ghosts very deliberately. I wanted to make a mainstream film. I very purposefully made a film that covered all opinions, and I wanted to have a provocative title that the mainstream would find appealing. And people generally like ghost stories. It's really as simple as that. I have one other reason. I actually struggled when trying to come up with a good title, but I like that the word ghost has multiple connotations. It's figurative, it's metaphorical, it's literal. And the different people in the story are having different experiences with their deceased. There's Ethel and Maxine, who are literally having a relationship with a phantom. And there's Karen and Irene, who are just struggling with them. They're being haunted by the memories of their late husbands. So the word kind of works for everybody in the story. And I like that kind of play on words a little bit. So anyway, I thought it was a kind of cool story for that reason alone. I also thought that Patrick Swayze came a long way in defanging that word. He made a very appealing ghost, most people would agree. So I just thought the word ghost was safe for no other reason for that reason. But a lot of people do get spooked. I gave a talk in front of Helping Parents Heal, which is a beautiful organization. It's very progressive. And as the title says, I mean, it's about parents who lost their kids prematurely. And when a parent is saying to me, hey, I don't want to think of this dead daughter as a ghost, how am I going to come back with anything that's meaningful to that parent? I mean, of course, if anything happened to my child, I wouldn't want to think of my child as a ghost, but hopefully that person now understands that, hey, if it appeals to the mainstream and that can get enough people into the theater seats, then it's worth it. Now, I'm going to tell you a short story. It's one of my favorites because it has to do with Bill Guggenheim. Does everybody here know who Bill Guggenheim is?
Of course.
The author of Hello from Heaven, wrote the seminal work, coined the term after-death communication. I was very excited after I finished this film to get it to Bill Guggenheim. I wanted he was kind of my intellectual hero, and he's the father of this work, right? I just thought I wanted his endorsement. So I wrote him an email and said, Bill, I just finished this film. I admire your work. If you don't mind, I would love for you to check it out. You don't have to endorse it if you don't like it, but I'd love for you to at least watch and let me know what you think. And, I kissed his butt a little bit, making sure we were on the same page. And he wrote me back a scathing email. And the email went something like this: I will not watch a film, read a book, or even consider a pamphlet that has the word ghost in it. It's pejorative. It makes me think of Halloween and spookiness and haunted houses. I won't see your film. Not only that, I implore you to change the title. I don't think you should have that title on your film. And he gave me all his reasons why it's just bad for our culture for me to be putting out a movie with the word ghost in the title. So, of course, I was crushed. I mean, Bill was my intellectual dad, and my dad was dead. So getting this kind of reaction was really not what I bargained for. But I wrote him back an email. I said, Bill, I'm so sorry this offended you. I think after you hear my reasoning, you'll agree, I trust you'll agree, that if it appeals to a mainstream audience, and for that reason, more people get to see it and more people change their minds and hearts, if that happens, maybe that's more important than having a title that appeals to your and my belief system. And I mean, how could you argue with that? I made a movie about his life's work. He wrote me a return email that's gave me another lashing, basically, for basically having that word in the title. So Bill refused. Bill boycotted my film, and I like talking about this at Q&As because it kind of puts me in bed with Bill. He's a celebrated author. I'm a no-name filmmaker. So it kind of puts us together. And, controversy kind of sells movies in some respects. So having this controversy, in a way, it's kind of a fun story. And I like bringing it up. By the way, Bill Guggenheim did end up seeing it unwittingly because the film premiered at the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And Bill was in the audience. And I could see Bill's name come on the screen because it was my Zoom that was broadcasting the film. So I know he saw it. Now, whether he saw my name in the credits and actually got up and walked out, I don't know. That could have happened. But I'm glad that Bill was forced to see the film, and that happened.
That's a great story, Steve. That's a great story.
I just looked up the word ghost. Ghost is an apparition of a dead person. And I think from what you're saying, it's so much bigger what you are embracing. And I think that what happens is people get stuck on that concept. And the first thing also that came to mind was there was a movie where there was a person that inhabited a house, and then the apparition stayed there for almost hundreds of years till finally it went to the light. So that's just sort of like a comment that what you're doing is so much bigger, and I don't really know even how to put the word to it, because it's not just a ghost, it's the essence, it's the soul, it's the spirit.
I realize just that's very, yes, right. Thank you for that. I realized I didn't fully answer Wendy's question earlier about people's reactions. One of the most rewarding things for me in these Q&As is to hear from people who feel so grateful that there's just something that has validated their own hunch. Their own hunches are, we can do this. We can have communication with our deceased loved ones. It's possible. And it's just wonderful to get that kind of feedback.
I was just going to talk about what other words can we use for the deceased. Daniel, you must have come across this a lot in your work. Professor Gary Schwartz keeps talking about, what is it, post-material persons, PMPs?
Right.
Is there another word that we can use? I know you've talked a lot about semantics.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think a very important thing for us to move towards. I call folks on the other side people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no reason why we should stop using their name, right, Daniel?
Right. Whether and to what extent we are on the other side, what we believe ourselves to be here, all we can do is the best we can do with this. And I think I would agree with you basically that we need to normalize this whole field of endeavor, of research and interest in personal experience. And that's why I tend to use words like people. Folks, I say folks on the other side. And by the other side, I simply mean the rest of reality that our senses can't encompass. Our senses have such a narrow band of reception, as it were, and that reality is so much greater than that. It's like each of us sitting here in front of our computers. There are thousands of radio and television broadcasts going through the space we inhabit at any given time, and it's like they don't exist until we have something that resonates with them. Bingo. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on that tangent. But
no, I think it's an excellent tangent. I'd like to get you both to think about the role of films in changing consciousness. I personally believe that what you're doing, what you both are doing, has made such an incredible impact on people. The whole field is changing. I think we've moved, particularly now, we've moved into a very visual age, and you're probably aware of the fact that people's attention span for books seems to have reduced dramatically. And it's really going to be up to the filmmakers to take this story, this research to the next level.
Well, I haven't had a chance to really talk to a lot, hundreds of people who've seen the films that actually, I credit where due, Tim Coleman and I were the co-producers of Calling Earth and also our film on the Skull Experiment, of which there are 2 versions out there. But we've gotten entirely positive feedback on them from the people that we have spoken with. And, one of the, I'm sure Stephen will agree with this, one of the challenges of making any film is your time constraint. You could do a 13-week series, I'm sure, from the footage that you that you gathered, and of course, filmmaking is not as easy as sitting down in front of a computer and writing. It's a tough grind in many respects, and very exacting and challenging. But I think it's worth it in the end. And I think that the fact that, people can go out and shoot stuff with their smartphones and edit it. Just, look what's available on YouTube or on Vimeo of a whole range of just interviews. Not to denigrate books. You go on Amazon and search on books and type in the word afterlife, and I think it's 30,000 results come up. So this, the tide is shifting. And the question is, how do we get, or actually, I'll take that back. Do we need to get permission from the gatekeepers of our culture? Or to what extent do we need to get that permission? This is something, Stephen, I think you're grappling with a little more than I am, because you're still on the East Coast. I left the East Coast years ago, I confess. And so I got to hand it to you, because the East Coast tends to be a very hard-nosed intellectual culture there. Mm-hmm. And that, that has its strengths, of course, but it's also a challenge. It has its own, it's its own religion in a way, and recycles its own dogma. And at the same time, we don't know, there's no way to know how much of the tide is rising behind the scenes, because we can't talk about it. How many scientists and academics, if they could share their experiences comfortably, would come out of the closet?
Right.
It's tough,
Daniel, that's exactly why I kind of leapt upon the University of North Texas study, because it was rare. They were actually facilitating after-death communication in a clinical setting. I believe that's a first. So I had to say, okay, let's film this. And Jen Holden, luckily, was gracious enough to say, I'm on board.
Right. Well, I very much look forward to seeing your film.
So where to next, guys? Where can you see films having a real impact in changing the belief? Do you have any thoughts on future projects?
I have thoughts. I think Daniel will be able to be more articulate than me on this, but here are my thoughts. I don't think film will convince the hard-nosed materialists of anything. I think that what has to happen is evidence, and I think that will change some hearts and minds. However, I still think a percentage of people will look at the evidence and say, no, that can't be true. And I believe that the same thing that happens to people, here's an analogy I like to use, and please tell me if this doesn't make sense. The analogy that I like to use is this one. Look at all the people who has a spouse that's cheating on them, and they won't acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. They know there's an extra cell phone in the house. They know that all of a sudden their spouse is checking themselves out in the mirror more often than they ever did before. They've joined a health club. They're getting fit, but they can't say, oh, maybe my spouse is cheating on me, because it's just too disruptive. They have a kid they have to bring to soccer practice. They have a party they have to plan. They have a project due at work. Whatever it is, there's 1,000 reasons why not to look at something too closely. And the materialists, I don't know why they would want to investigate afterlife stuff if it's so against the core of their being, of who they stand for. I mean, it belies who they are. And it's hard to look at something that completely belies your existence.
Or what you perceive your existence to be.
Right.
There's some soul searching that needs to go on with anyone who's confronted with evidence of a greater reality. And then the question of film also brings up the question of fiction. We're doing documentaries, and that's one part of the story. I've chosen to focus on the hardest evidence I could find, which of course eliminates a certain audience. But that's just my leaning. But I've also been working on a screenplay, which it's been on the shelf for most of 10 years, and I'm now I'm having a finger wagged at me from a friend on the other side. It's a long story. So you got to finish the screenplay. So I've dusted that off and I'm working on it. And it doesn't address the afterlife directly. It's a bigger story, but the afterlife is just a natural part of the reality in which the story takes place. But that's a whole nother thing, and God knows if it'll ever be produced. But I do honor the role that fiction, particularly some of the greater science fiction works have in film and TV have contributed to our understanding of a greater reality. Or at least they've put the memes into the culture and the language that makes these things, if not believable, then at least thinkable. Does that make sense to you, Stephen?
It does.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second with details of the screening of the film? That we're sponsoring a screening of the film. The details are in the chat now, and we're asking our people if they can do so to click on that link and make a donation to the project, and then you will be able to watch the film in full between this coming Friday the 30th of June, and Monday the 3rd of July. So the link is there. You'll be able. Now, Stephen is not allowed to put the film on to any of the streaming platforms yet, because he's got to deal with the film festivals. So the only way he can actually show it, he can't put it on Amazon or anything else just yet. The only way he can show it is in private screenings like this. So we've agreed to publicise this particular screening, and we're hoping that everybody will support it. We're hoping that people will send out the link to their mailing list. Say, look, if you know somebody who is grieving, it's not just a film about the afterlife. It's a specifically film about grief and about overcoming grief.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a kind of film that if you have somebody in your family who you've not been able to talk to about the afterlife, and we all have them, it might be a really good way of inviting them to have a look at a very interesting film. Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that about sending?
Do I want people to share my film? Yes.
Yeah.
I want people to share my film. I think that it's not just, it's for people. I mean, I think people who benefit the most from it are people who have lost someone dear to them. But I think people who are just interested in life would also be interested in the film, because it's about our lives and what happens to us, what potentially happens to us during our lifetime and after death. So I'd like everybody to see it. Everybody who could possibly benefit from the film should see it.
I think that this is what I love about both of your films, is this whole thing of we can talk about it, because there's just been this conspiracy of silence. I think most of you know, lots and lots of people have reunions with people, but they keep quiet about it. They think, you'll hear them say, people will think I'm crazy.
It's true. To your point, Wendy, the widows that I was interviewing for the film, I gathered them all together at my mother's house the night before principal photography began. It's kind of a little party, a little get-together, so everybody feels comfortable with the crew. And these widows didn't realize that they were having these experiences. They knew they were having the experiences, but they hadn't shared it with anybody because they were afraid of the backlash. So here these widows were finding out for the first time, and some of them were good friends. They were finding out for the first time that everybody in the room had some kind of an experience. One woman said she smells cigar smoke in her house all the time because her husband smoked cigars when he was alive. Nobody smokes cigars in the house now, but she figured that was his way of saying hello. She would smell a cigar. So these little things, these little stories kind of popped up, and it was a big surprise, and it was kind of fun for everybody to find out. So that was also rewarding for me to see that this de facto support group was kind of forming just because they had not known that this was a mutually shared experience, and now they do.
That's fantastic. Any final thoughts, Stephen?
Thank you. This is a fun time. I like meeting Dan and Dr. Hogan. That was great. Thank you.
Likewise.
And everybody, great seeing everybody here. Great interview, Wendy. Thank you for that.
Okay, let's hear from some of the people in the audience. Anybody like to thank our speakers today? Craig, can I get you to start?
Yeah, it's wonderful. Both of you, Steve and Dan, just we have such a marvelous message. And I do think the video is going to be the way that we're going to make a difference because of the fact that it's so demonstrative. And that's going to bring people out of the closet. And as they enjoy watching things together, they're going to say, oh, yeah, I've had an experience like that. Or, yeah, I understand my grandmother keeps coming to me every night. And so we're going to have more of that. So I think video is just a wonderful way to do it. And you're doing marvelous work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And so are you.
Yes, ditto.
Stephen, thank you for coming and sharing the details about your film. I can't wait to see it. Dan, of course, it's a pleasure to see you again, and I'm really grateful for all the similar type of work that you're doing. I absolutely agree with Wendy that film is one of the best ways to get this information out to people. I do believe the tide is rising, and it's rising quickly, and people just need to see that there's places where it is being discussed, and so they will then begin to feel freer to talk about a film with their friends or with their families. So thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Carol?
I just put it in the chat. Well, I was thanking everybody, Wendy and Karen and Daniel and Stephen and Craig. It was just, I'm so excited to see this movie. I am so excited about it.
Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited and looking forward to the movie too. But just to concur with everything you've said, my son crossed over in 2008, but although I was into all of this since I was 20, so it wasn't new for me. But all I can say is my expectations were, I never expected to get all I've been blessed with. And I just think of it as the cosmic internet that we're all connected to. And I think I'm so grateful. I think film is such a great media. I really look forward to seeing your film. I adore Dan's films, and I just want to thank you both for your contribution.
Thank you, Sherry.
Well, I'd just like to share a little story about automatic writing. In the mid-'80s, I was in Miami, a rather very wealthy neighborhood. I was going to perform a massage on someone I didn't know. As I opened, as the door got open, I was standing outside the door. I found myself saying that this older gentleman remembered a bear. And he looked at me and he goes, "Who are you?" I said, "I don't know. I just heard that." And he says, "Come on in." So he brought me into his, penthouse. It was in Bell Harbor, for those who know Miami Beach area. And it was full of bears everywhere. Then he showed me one bear that was programmed by his wife that had just passed away with messages for him, that she was always going to be with him and love him. Their love is eternal. And then he brought me out to the balcony and he says, "I sit here every single morning and my wife and I, we write to each other." And he goes, and it's as if God was speaking with the both of us. And he read me, his wife's responses to him. And it was the most beautiful, poetic, romantic, just confession, so to speak, of their love that was eternal. And she told him, "I will never leave you. We are connected eternally." And it was just so moving. We both sat there like in complete amazement and wonder, with tears in our eyes. And, now that, Stephen, you were talking about that, I just remember that story and I just wanted to share it. There's, he was the founder of the stone-washed jeans, which were so popular So he was an old, rich Jewish man, which I would never, ever have expected to have that kind of experience.
Yeah, just briefly, I just wanted to mention or ask whether Dan or Steve had heard about Documentary Australia, which had a festival just recently in Sydney. They have a Twitter and a website, and I would urge them to get in touch with them because they're always looking for stories to be made into documentaries or to promote documentaries, and there've been some fabulous ones. So if you can get into the network of filmmakers there, that will be fantastic.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. I think it is fabulous. And just to say, if there's a way to marry this with religion, I'm Jewish also. And it's just a lot of times I just have to hold my tongue. And I'd say the only other, because people can't accept what I'm going to say, but occasionally when we get a little bit aside, after the rabbi talks, a lot of this stuff will come out. And the other thing is just because I've done a lot of energy work, et cetera, is just a protection. In other words, when people are doing this communication, sometimes there's other spiritual interferences. So when it's done, I guess the thing is building in some kind of safety for the person that wants to communicate with the other, being in the afterlife.
Yes, thank you, Janice. That reminded me that with the team of mediums that I work with, we always, when we get together on Zoom, because we live in different parts of the country, we always do a sort of a protection ritual at the start of our sessions. And I think that's important to put out the intention in that sort of way. Also want to mention and put in a plug for a website that we've created, which I think if you all haven't seen it yet, that you will enjoy. It's called the Cosmic Voices Network. And the link is Cosmic Voices, one word, .network. Not net, but network. CosmicVoices.network. And it's got some very remarkable channeling from people whose names you know and many that you may not know. And if you look under the About link, you'll see who we are and so on. But I think you'll enjoy the messages, and I think they're very important for our time.
So, well, look, thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. And Stephen, I think the film's going to do fantastically. It's an amazing film, and I'm happy to give any kind of endorsement that you'd like. If you, I don't know if that would help in any way, but certainly we will be promoting it this week. We'll be promoting it in the Friday Report next week, and we hope that lots of people will turn up for the screening.